Welcome back. Before we begin, I want you to take a deep breath. Somewhere in the quiet darkness of your room, your brain is preparing for a journey it takes every single night. But tonight, we are going to look closer at what happens when that journey is cut short. I'm your sleepy scientist, and this is the anatomy of a tired mind. What happens to your brain when you sleep less than 6 hours every night? Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine this scenario with me. Really visualize it. Really see it in your mind. It's 2:30 in the morning, and you're still wide awake. Lying in your bed, phone glowing in the darkness, scrolling endlessly through social media, watching videos, reading articles, checking emails, responding to messages. You keep telling yourself, just 5 more minutes. Just one more post. Just one more video. I'll sleep soon. I promise I'll put the phone down. But the minutes keep slipping away, turning into hours. And suddenly it's 3 in the morning. Then 3:30. Then 4. Tomorrow morning. In just a few short hours, you have an important meeting, a crucial presentation, deadlines to meet, people depending on you, responsibilities, waiting. But tonight, right now, in this very moment, sleep feels optional, negotiable, postponable, something that can wait just a little bit longer. You've done this before. Many times. Dozens of times. Maybe hundreds of times. And you've been fine. Right? You're functional. Productive. Getting things done. Managing your life. Handling your responsibilities. Sure. You feel tired sometimes. Maybe you need an extra cup of coffee, or 2 or 3. Maybe you're a bit foggy in the afternoons. Maybe you're not quite as sharp as you used to be. But nothing serious. Nothing you can't handle. Nothing that's really a problem. But WHED if I told you that right now, at this very second, as you sacrifice another precious hour of sleep, something absolutely horrifying, something you cannot see, something you cannot feel, something you cannot hear or touch or smell, is happening inside your skull, your brain, that magnificent 3-pound universe of neurons and synapses that contains every memory you've ever made, every skill you've ever learned, every emotion you've ever felt, every thought you've ever had, every dream you've ever dreamed, is slowly, quietly, systematically, irreversibly breaking down. And here's the truly terrifying truth. The nightmare that keeps sleep scientists awake at night. The reality that most people never learn until it's already too late. You won't even notice it. You won't feel it happening. You won't recognize the damage until the damage has already become permanent. Welcome to the hidden catastrophe. the silent epidemic, the slow motion disaster, the invisible crisis of chronic sleep deprivation. Section 1. The illusion of functioning. 2:30 to 10 o'clock. Let me ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with yourself. I want you to really think about your answer. Don't just give me the answer you think you should give. Give me the real answer. How many hours did you sleep last night? 5 hours? 4 hours? 6 if you were lucky? 3.5 because you stayed up binge watching that new series everyone's talking about? And here's the really interesting part. The part that should genuinely concern you. The part that should make you stop and reconsider everything. You probably think you're functioning just fine, don't you? You woke up this morning, hit the snooze button 3 or 4 times, dragged yourself out of bed, stumbled to the coffee maker, downed your first cup before you even felt human, grabbed your second cup, maybe your third, went through your daily routine on autopilot, responded to emails without really reading them carefully, attended meetings where you nodded along but couldn't quite focus on every word, completed tasks that took twice as long as they should have, got things done, kind of, mostly. Sure, you felt a little tired. Okay, maybe more than a little tired. Maybe actually quite tired. Maybe exhausted would be a more accurate word. But you pushed through. You always push through. You're tough. You're resilient. You can handle it. But here's what you don't know. What you couldn't possibly know without somehow being able to see inside your own brain and measure your own cognitive performance objectively. According to a groundbreaking study, a study that should have fundamentally changed how our entire society thinks about sleep, conducted by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, led by Dr. David Dingus, one of the world's foremost experts on sleep, deprivation, and human performance, and published in the prestigious peer-reviewed journal Sleep in 2003. Something absolutely fascinating and absolutely terrifying happens when you consistently sleep less than 6 hours per night. Your brain begins to lie to you, not metaphorically, not figuratively, but literally. Your brain begins providing you with false information about your own cognitive state. Let me explain exactly what happened in this landmark study, because the implications, the real world consequences, are absolutely staggering. And most people have never heard about this research, never learned about these findings, never understood what's really happening to them. The researchers took healthy adults, people just like you and me, with no sleep disorders, no medical conditions, no psychiatric problems, completely normal individuals, and they restricted their sleep to just 6 hours per night for 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks. 14 consecutive nights. That's all it took. Now, before we go any further, I want you to think about your own sleep patterns. Have you slept 6 hours or less per night for the past 2 weeks? The past month? The past 6 months? The past several years? Keep that in mind as we continue. Because here's where the study becomes truly disturbing, truly alarming, truly horrifying. By the end of those 2 weeks, just 14 nights of 6 hours sleep. These people's cognitive performance, their reaction times, their ability to focus and concentrate, their capacity for logical reasoning, their decision-making abilities, their working memory, their attention span, had all declined measurably, objectively, significantly. To what level? To the same level, the exact same level, as someone who had been kept awake for 24 hours straight, a full day and night without any sleep whatsoever. Think about that for a moment. Really let that sink in. Really understand what that means. 2 weeks of 6-hour nights equals pulling an all-nighter. But here's the truly horrifying part. The finding that should make every single one of us fundamentally reconsider our entire relationship with sleep. The participants in this study, these people whose performance had declined to all-nighter levels, didn't feel that impaired. They didn't think their performance had declined that dramatically. They didn't believe they were functioning at the level of someone who'd been up for 20-4 hours straight. They didn't recognize the severity of their own cognitive impairment. When researchers asked them to rate their own sleepiness, their own performance, their own level of impairment, they consistently, dramatically, dangerously underestimated how badly they were actually performing. They thought they were maybe a little tired, a bit slower than usual, slightly less sharp, but basically fine, basically functional, basically capable. Meanwhile, objective testing showed THEY were catastrophically impaired. This phenomenon, this absolutely critical finding that has massive implications for every aspect of modern life, is what scientists call performance without awareness. Your brain is literally malfunctioning, losing its ability to process information correctly, making errors, failing at basic cognitive tasks. But simultaneously, it's also losing its ability to recognize that it's malfunctioning. It's like being intoxicated, but not knowing you're intoxicated, while insisting you're perfectly sober, perfectly capable, perfectly safe to drive a car, operate heavy machinery, perform surgery, pilot an airplane, make life or death decisions. And here's what makes this even more alarming, even more dangerous, even more concerning. Dr. David Dingas and his team discovered something else, something that compounds the problem, makes it worse. makes it more insidious. The cognitive deficits accumulated over time in a linear fashion, building upon themselves, growing larger and larger, meaning every single night of 6 hours sleep added to the deficit built upon the previous night's damage, compounded the impairment, made everything worse. After 1 week, 7 nights, participants were measurably impaired, but still somewhat functional, still able to complete basic tasks, still getting by. After 2 weeks, 14 nights, they were severely impaired, equivalent to being legal LY drunk, dangerous to themselves and others, but completely unaware of how impaired they actually were. And the researchers estimated, based on the trajectory of the data, that if the study had continued for another week or 2, the impairment would have been catastrophic, potentially life-threatening, absolutely unsafe in any scenario requiring cognitive performance. Now, I want you to think about your own life. Really think about it. Be honest with yourself. Have you been sleeping 6 hours or less? For a week? 2 weeks? A month? 6 months? A year? 5 years? 10 years? Your entire adult life? Every decision you've made during that time. Every important choice. Every conversation with your loved ones. Every email you've sent at work. Every meeting you've attended. Every project you've completed. Every interaction with your children, your partner, your colleagues, your clients, your patients if you're a healthcare worker, your students if you're a teacher. You are operating with a fundamentally broken instrument, a malfunctioning computer, a damaged processor, and that broken instrument was simultaneously telling you, convincingly, persuasively, that everything was fine. Dr. Matthew Walker, the renowned sleep scientist from the University of California, Berkeley, director of the Center for Human Sleep Science, and author of the international bestseller, Why We Sleep, puts it this way in his research in his book. He says, and I'm quoting directly here, "Human beings are the only species that deliberately deprive themselves of sleep for no apparent biological gain. Every other animal on Earth, when it needs sleep, it sleeps. Period. No negotiations. No stay up late to finish one more episode. No sacrificing sleep for productivity." And then Dr. Walker adds something even more striking, even more definitive. He says, the number of people who can survive on 6 hours of sleep, or less without owing any impairment, rounded to a whole number, and expressed as a percentage of the population, is 0-inch. Not 1%, not 0.5%, not 0.1%, 0. If You think you're one of those rare people who can function perfectly fine on 6 hours or less. You're not. You're simply like the participants in the University of Pennsylvania study, unable to accurately assess your own impairment. You're the drunk driver, insisting he's sober, insisting he's fine to drive, while failing every sobriety test. Section 2. The prefrontal cortex shut down, 10 o'clock. 2000 hours now? Let's dive deeper into the mechanics, into what's actually happening at the neurological level, inside your brain, when you don't get an oof sleep. And we need to start with the most important region of your entire brain, the part that makes you uniquely human, the part that separates us from every other species on Earth. The prefrontal cortex. This region, this remarkable structure, sitting right behind your forehead, right there. If you put your hand on your forehead right now, that's where it is essentially the CEO of your entire brain. The executive control center, the command headquarters, the decision-making hub, the impulse control regulator, everything that separates humans from other animals, everything that allows us to plan for the future, to reason abstractly, to make complex decisions, to control our impulses, to regulate our emotions, to engage in moral reasoning, to express our unique personalities, to behave appropriately in social situations, to focus our attention, to organize our thoughts, to think before we act. All of it, every single bit of it, controlled by this remarkable structure. Your prefrontal cortex, in many ways, is you. It's your personality, your character, your ability to be a functional human being in modern society. Now, here's what happens when you sleep less than 6 hours per night. Studies using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI scans, which allows scientists to see your brain in action, to watch which regions are active, which regions are shutting down, which regions are communicating with each other. Studies from multiple prestigious institutions, including Harvard Medical School, the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Pennsylvania, the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, and dozens of others, have all shown consistently, repeatedly, definitively, something absolutely remarkable, something that should terrify anyone who values their cognitive abilities. When you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex starts to shut down, not completely, not all at once, not like flipping a light switch off, but gradually, progressively, systematically, like someone slowly turning down a dimmer switch, reducing the lights, bit by bit, degree by degree, until the room grows darker and darker and darker. Dr. Matthew Walker, who has spent decades studying this phenomenon, describes it beautifully and terrifyingly in his research. He says, sleep deprivation is like removing the gentle supervisory hand of the prefrontal cortex. From the emotional accelerator, pedal of the brain. What does this mean in practical, real-world terms? Let me give you some concrete examples. Scenarios you've probably experienced yourself. Moments you've probably lived through without realizing what was really happening. That argument you had with your partner this morning. The one where you said things you immediately regretted. Where you snapped over something trivial. Something that normally wouldn't bother you. Where you couldn't seem to control your emotional reactions. Where you felt like someone else had taken over your mouth. Where you were angrier than the situation warranted. Where you escalated instead of de-escalating. Where you said hurtful things you didn't mean. That wasn't really you. That wasn't your true character. That was your sleep deprived prefrontal cortex. Too exhausted to properly regulate your emotional responses. Unable to maintain impulse control. Unable to keep the lid on your amygdala. Your brain's emotional alarm system. Unable to stop you from saying things you'd normally keep to yourself. That impulse purchase you made late at night. Scrolling through your phone in bed. Seeing that advertisement. That product you don't need. Can't really afford. Don't even particularly want. But clicking buy now anyway. And then regretting it the next morning. Wondering what you were thinking. That was your prefrontal cortex. Too exhausted to apply the brakes. To stop impulsive behavior. To make rational decisions about long-term consequences versus short-term gratification. To protect you from yourself. That moment at work yesterday afternoon, when you stared at your computer screen, reading the same paragraph 5 times, unable to absorb the information, unable to focus, unable to concentrate, your mind wandering constantly, thinking about random things, unable to force yourself to pay attention no matter how hard you tried. That was your prefrontal cortex, struggling desperately to maintain attention, fighting a losing battle, because it's running on empty, because it doesn't have the metabolic resources to maintain focus, because it's been damaged by insufficient sleep. But here's what makes is truly frightening, truly alarming, truly concerning for anyone who chronically doesn't get enough sleep. The damage compounds. It accumulates. It builds upon itself. Day after day, night after night, week after week, month after month, year after year. Each night of insufficient sleep doesn't just affect you the following day. It creates a cumulative deficit, a growing debt that gets larger and larger, that becomes harder and harder to repay. Researchers at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research a premier military research facility dedicated to understanding human performance under stress, conducted an extensive multi-year study examining exactly how these cognitive deficits accumulate over time, how the de-image builds, how the impairment grows. What they found was absolutely staggering, absolutely alarming. After just 1 week, 7 consecutive nights of sleeping only 6 hours per night, participants showed cognitive impairments. Mizu read through dozens of different tests that were equivalent, statistically identical, to missing an entire night of sleep. Let that sink in for a moment. Really absorb what that means. 7 nights of 6-hour sleep equals 1 complete LL-nighter. 7 nights of what many people consider pretty good sleep equals staying awake for 20-4 hours straight. But here's the critical difference. The factor that makes chronic sleep restriction so much more dangerous than Akusai on all-nighters. When you pull an all-nighter, when you stay up all night studying for an exam or finishing a project or traveling or whatever the reason, you know you're impaired. You feel it acutely. You're aware of your limitations. You take precautions. You're careful. You don't make important decisions. You don't drive if you can avoid it. You know you're not at your best. But with chronic sleep restriction, with 7 nights of 6-hour sleep, with weeks or months or years of insufficient sleep, you have absolutely no idea, no awareness, no recognition that you're just as impaired, just as cognitively compromised, just as dangerous to yourself and others. You feel tired. Sure, you feel like you could use M or sleep. Absolutely. But functional, capable, competent, able to perform your duties, able to make good decisions, able to handle your responsibilities. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex is barely functioning, operating at a fraction of its normal capacity, making errors left and right. Dr. Namni Goel, one of the lead researchers at Walter Reed, who has dedicated her career to understanding sleep deprivation, discovered something even more disturbing in follow-up studies. She found that the prefrontal cortex dysfunction doesn't recover quickly, doesn't bounce back easily, doesn't return to normal with just 1 or 2 good nights of sleep. In her carefully controlled experiments, participants who had been sleep restricted to 6 hours per night for 2 weeks were then given 3 full nights, 70-2 hours of recovery sleep, 8 hours per night. In ideal conditions, dark room, no disturbances, perfect sleep environment. You would think, logically, that 3 nights of good recovery sleep would bring them back to baseline, back to normal functioning, back to their pre-restriction cognitive capacity. Right? Wrong. Devastatingly wrong. Their prefrontal cortex function improved somewhat, showed some recovery, demonstrated partial restoration, but it didn't fully recover, didn't return to baseline, didn't restore them to their original cognitive capacity, even after 3 nights of adequate sleep. After 7 and 2 hours of recovery, they still showed significant impairments, measurable deficits, real problems in executive function, decision-making, impulse control, emotional regulation, attention, working memory. Dr. Goel estimated, based on her data, that full recovery, complete restoration of prefrontal cortex function, might take a week or more, possibly 2 weeks, of consistent 8-hour sleep. And that's after only 2 weeks of restriction, only 14 nights of 6-hour sleep. Imagine if you've been sleeping 6 hours or less for months, for years, for decades. How long would it take for your prefrontal cortex to fully recover, to return to what it should be, to function at its true capacity? We don't fully know, because studies that long, lasting months or years, are extraordinarily difficult to conduct, expensive to fund, challenging to maintain. But some researchers, based on the available data, based on the trajectory of recovery curves, estimate it could take months, possibly even longer, of consistent adequate sleep to fully repair the accumulated damage. Months of doing everything right, of sleeping 8 hours every single night, of perfect sleep hygiene, just to get back to baseline. And here's an even more sobering thought, one that should genuinely concern anyone who has chronically deprived themselves of sleep for years. Some of the damage might be permanent, might be irreversible. MIG-HT never fully heal. But we'll get to that in Part 2. Section 3. The Memory Formation Collapse. 2000 hours. 30:00. Let's talk about memory, about learning, about your brain's extraordinary ability to acquire new information and store it for future use. Because what happens to your memory systems when you consistently sleep less than 6 hours is nothing short of catastrophic, nothing short of a complete system failure. Your brain has this absolutely extraordinary ability. Is remarkable capacity to learn new information, to remember experiences, to store knowledge, to recall facts, to recognize faces, to remember names, to retain skills, to build expertise. This ability, this capacity for memory, is fundamental to who you are as a person. It's your history, your identity, your accumulated knowledge, your life experience. But here's the thing that most people don't understand. That most people have never been taught. That changes everything about how we should think about sleep. This ability to form memories, to consolidate information, to convert short-term memories into long-term storage, isn't constant throughout the day, doesn't happen continuously, doesn't occur while you're awake. The consolidation of memories, the actual process of taking temporary memories and converting them into permanent storage, happens primarily, almost exclusively, during sleep. Let me paint you a picture, give you a metaphor that makes this crystal clear. Imagine your brain as a vast library, a magnificent library with millions of books, representing all your memories, all your knowledge, all your experiences. During the day, while you're awake, you're constantly gathering new books, new experiences, new information, new knowledge, new memories. But these books, they're not filed away yet. They're not in the proper places. They're not organized. They're just piled up, haphazardly, chaotically, in the entrance hall of the library, scattered across the floor, stacked on tables, leaning against walls, mixed together, disorganized, temporary, vulnerable. Sleep is when the night librarian comes in, the expert organizer, the master archivist, and carefully, methodically, files everything away into the proper shelves, into the correct categories, into long-term storage, where they'll be preserved, protected, accessible whenever you need them. The librarian examines each book, each memory, and decides, is this important? Should we keep this? Where does it belong? How should we categorize it? What should we connect it to? Without enough sleep, without sufficient time for this filing process, without adequate opportunity for consolidation, the books just keep piling up in the entrance hall, growing more and more chaotic, more and more disorganized, more and more vulnerable. Eventually, there's no room for new books, and old books start getting damaged, getting lost, getting mixed up, getting forgotten. This isn't just a metaphor. This isn't just a convenient analogy. This is literally what happens in your hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped structure deep in your brain, and that's absolutely critical for forming new memories. The hippocampus is extraordinarily sensitive to sleep deprivation, remarkably vulnerable to insufficient sleep, dramatically impaired by even moderate sleep restriction. A landmark study from the University of California, Berkeley, led by Dr. Matthew Walker, used brain imaging technology, functional MRI scans, to show exactly what happens to the hippocampus when you don't get enough sleep. They took two groups of people. Both GROPs were asked to learn new information, to memorize lists, to study material, to acquire new knowledge. One group slept normally, 8 hours of good quality sleep. The other group was kept awake all night. Total sleep deprivation, no sleep whatsoever. The next day, both groups came into the lab, and while their brains were being scanned, while scientists watched their brain activity in real time, they were asked to learn new information, to form new memories, to encode new knowledge. The results were absolutely stunning, absolutely clear, absolutely definitive. The sleep-deprived group showed a 40% deficit, a 40% reduction in their ability to form new memories. 40%, nearly half their memory forming capacity, gone, eliminated, unavailable. But here's what makes the study even more remarkable, even more illuminating, even more important for understanding what's happening to your brain. The brain scans revealed, in vivid detail, exactly what was happening. The hippocampus, in the sleep-deprived individuals, was essentially offline, not functioning properly, not activating the way it should, not encoding information correctly, not doing its job. It wasn't that the memory was being formed and then forgotten. It was that the memory wasn't being formed in the first place. It's like trying to record something on a broken recording device. You might think you're recording. You might PRS all the right buttons. But nothing's actually being saved. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that was total sleep deprivation. Complete lack of sleep. I'm still getting some sleep. 6 hours. 5 hours. That's not nothing. Fair point. Reasonable objection. Logical question. But here's the devastating reality. Here's what the follow-up research has shown. Chronic partial sleep deprivation, consistently sleeping 5 to 6 hours per night, has a remarkably similar AR effect, produces comparable impairment, causes similar damage to the hippocampus. A study published in the prestigious journal Nature Neuroscience, one of the top neuroscience journals in the world, found that even moderate sleep restriction, 5 to 6 hours per night for just 1 week, significantly impairs hippocampal function, reduces memory formation capacity, damages the brain's ability to learn, and it gets worse. Much worse. Devastatingly worse. The effects are cumulative. They build upon themselves. They compound over time. Each night of inadequate sleep further damages your brain's ability to form and consolidate memories. Further impairs the hippocampus. further reduces your learning capacity. This means, in practical terms, that if you're trying to learn something new, if you're taking a class, studying for an exam, learning a new skill, trying to master a new language, acquiring expertise in your field, building knowledge in any area, your brain is literally unable to properly store the information, unable to consolidate the memories, unable to move the knowledge from temporary storage into long-term retention. You're trying to fill a bucket, but the bucket has a hole in the bottom, and the hole gets bigger with every night of insufficient sleep. You might study for hours, read the material dozens of times, work incredibly hard to learn, but without adequate sleep, without sufficient time for memory, consolidation, much of that effort is wasted, lost, ineffective. The information goes in temporarily, but it doesn't stick, doesn't consolidate, doesn't become permanent knowledge. And here's perhaps the most tragic part of all this. The most frustrating aspect. The most wasteful element. Many students, many professionals, many people trying to learn and improve, stay up late studying, sacrifice sleep to get more work done, pull all-nighters before exams, work through the NIG-HT to finish projects, thinking they're being productive, thinking they're maximizing their time, thinking they're doing what it takes to succeed, when in reality, they're sabotaging themselves, undermining their own efforts, destroying their brain's ability to actually retain what they're studying. They would literally be better off studying less and sleeping more. Section 4. The amygdala. Hijack 30:00-40:00. Let's shift our focus now and talk about emotions, about feelings, about your brain's emotional processing centers. Because what happens to your emotional brain when you don't sleep enough is perhaps the most disturbing, the most personally impactful, the most immediately noticeable part of this entire nightmare. Deep in the center of your brain, buried beneath the cortex, sits a small almond-shaped structure about the size of, well, an almond, called the amygdala. This tiny structure, this little cluster of neurons, is your emotional alarm system, your threat detector, your fear processor, your anxiety generator. It's responsible for processing emotions, especially negative ones, especially threatening ones. Fear, anxiety, anger, stress, panic, worry. The amygdala is constantly scanning your environment, constantly evaluating situations, constantly asking, is this safe? Is this dangerous? Should I be afraid? Should I be angry? Should I panic? Now, under normal circumstances, when you're well, rested, when you've had adequate sleep, when your brain is functioning properly, your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala work together beautifully, in perfect harmony, in balanced cooperation. The amygdala detects potential threats, identifies emotional situations, flags things that might be concerning, and the prefrontal cortex acts like a wise supervisor, like a calm manager, like a rational adult. It evaluates the amygdala's concerns rationally, puts things in perspective, determines whether the threat is real or exaggerated, decides on an appropriate response, keeps emotional reactions in check, maintains balance. It's a beautiful system, an elegant system, a sophisticated system. When it works properly, it's what allows us to feel emotions, but not be controlled by them, to recognize threats, but not panic unnecessarily, to experience fear, but still function rationally. But when you're sleep deprived, when you've been sleeping 6 hours or less, when your prefrontal cortex is impaired, this system breaks down catastrophically, fails completely, produces devastating consequences. Dr. Sung Shik and his team at Harvard Medical School, at one of the world's premier research institutions, conducted a groundbreaking experiment, a study that revealed exactly what happens to your emotional brain when you don't sleep. They took participants, healthy volunteers, and divided them into two groups. One group slept normal LY, 8 hours of good quality sleep in a comfortable lab. The other group was kept awake for 30-5 hours straight, well over a full day, complete sleep deprivation. Then, while scanning their brains with fMRI technology, while watching their neural activity in real time, they showed both groups a series of images, ranging from completely neutral to mildly emotional to highly disturbing, the kind of images that would naturally provoke some emotional response. But nothing extreme, nothing that should cause panic or severe distress. The results were absolutely shocking, absolutely disturbing, absolutely clear in their implications. In the well-rested group, when shown emotional images, the amygdala show at a moderate response, appropriate activation, reasonable emotional reaction, and critically, the prefrontal cortex remained connected, remained in control, remained able to regulate the emotional response, kept everything in balance. But in the sleep-deprived group, in the people who had been awake for 30-5 hours, the amygdala went absolutely wild, showed massive activation, lit up like a fireworks display, went into overdrive. It showed a 60% increase, a 60% amplification in emotional reactivity, 60% more emotional response to the exact same images. That produced moderate responses in the well-rested group. But here's the truly terrifying part. The finding that explains so much about how we feel and behave when we're sleep deprived. The brain scans revealed in unmistakable detail that the connection, the communication pathway between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala had essentially disconnected, had broken down, had failed. The rational brain, the supervisor, the regulator, could no longer control the emotional brain, could no longer calm down the amygdala, could no longer maintain balance. The inmates had taken over the asylum. The emotinal brain was running wild, with no supervision, no regulation, no control. This explains so much about how we feel when we're tired. Why that small inconvenience, like spilling coffee or hitting traffic, feels like a catastrophe, feels like the end of the world, feels unbearable. Why you snap at people you love over trivial things, over nothing really, things that normally wouldn't bother you at all. Why anxiety feels overwhelming, why stress feels unbearable, why everything feels more intense, more dramatic, more emotional, more difficult to handle. Why you cry during commercials, why you get angry at strangers, why you panic over minor problems, why you feel like you're losing your mind. It's not weakness. It's not a character flaw. It's not that you're being dramatic or overreacting. It's your amygdala running wild, hyperactive, oversensitive, overreacting to everything, without the regulatory control, the calming influence, irrational supervision of your prefrontal cortex. And here's what makes this even worse, even more concerning, even more problematic for long-term health and well-being. This isn't just about one bad day. This isn't just temporary moodiness. This isn't just being cranky because you're tired. Chronic sleep deprivation, consistently sleeping less than 6 hours per night, creates chronic emotional dysregulation, persistent amygdala hyperactivity, ongoing emotional instability. A comprehensive long-term study from the University of Pittsburgh, following people over several years, tracking their sleep patterns and their mental health, found something deeply disturbing. Individuals who consistently slept less than 6 hours per night showed significantly higher rates, dramatically increased prevalence of anxiety disorders, mood disorders, depression, emotional instability. And critically, the research showed this wasn't just correlation. It wasn't just that ANXES people happen to sleep less. It was causation. The lack of sleep was directly causing these emotional problems. The sleep deprivation was creating the mental health issues. The insufficient sleep came first, and the emotional problems follow. Your brain, when deprived of adequate sleep, literally loses its ability to regulate emotions properly, loses its capacity to maintain emotional balance, loses its power to keep you emotionally stable. Section 5. The toxic waste. Accumulati on 40:00-50:00 now. We need to talk about something that most people have never heard of. Something that sounds like science fiction, but is absolutely real, absolutely critical, absolutely terrifying in its implications. Your brain has a garbage disposal system, a waste removal system, a cleaning system. It's called the glymphatic system, discovered only recently, in 2012, by Dr. Maiken Nedergaard at the University of Rochester. And it only works, only functions, only operates while you sleep. Let me explain this carefully, because this might be the single most important thing I tell you today. The most crucial piece of information in this entire presentation. Every day, every hour, every minute, as your brain operates, as neurons fire, as you think and process and function, your brain produces waste products, metabolic byproducts, cellular debris, damaged proteins, toxic substances. This is normal. This is natural. This happens in every organ, every tissue, every cell in your body. But in most of your body, there's a lymphatic system, a network of vessels that constantly removes waste, cleans up debris, carries away toxins. Your brain, however, doesn't have a traditional lymphatic system. It's protected by the blood-brain barrier, isolated, separated from the body's normal waste removal systems. So how does your brain remove waste? That's what Dr. Nedergaard discovered. And what she discovered should change how every human being on Earth thinks about sleep. During the day, while you're awake, while your brain is actively functioning, waste products accumulate, toxic proteins build up, debris collects in the spaces between neurons. One of the most important and most dangerous of these waste products is a protein called beta amyloid. You might have heard of beta amyloid because it's the primary component, the main ingredient of the plaques found in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. Those plaques, those tangles, those deposits that destroy memory and cognition are made primarily of beta amyloid. Now, here's the critical part. Here's what changes everything. During the day, as your brain works, beta amyloid accumulates, builds up, increases in concentration in the spaces between your neurons. But at night, during deep sleep, during that precious time when you're unconscious and your brain should be resting, something absolutely remarkable happens. Something extraordinary. Something essential for brain health. The glymphatic system activates, turns on, begins its work. Your brain cells, your neurons and support cells actually shrink by about 60%, creating more space between the cells and cerebrospinal fluid, the clear fluid that surrounds your brain and spinal cord, washes through these expanded spaces like a tide, like a river, like a cleaning wave, washing away the accumulate waste, carrying away the beta amyloid, removing the toxic proteins, clearing out the debris, cleaning your brain. It's like your brain is taking itself to the car wash, running itself through a cleaning cycle, performing essential maintenance every single night. If you sleep adequately, if you get enough deep sleep, your brain cleans itself. But here's the problem. Here's the catastrophic issue. Here's what goes terribly wrong when you don't sleep enough. This system, this glymphatic cleaning process, only works during deep sleep, only functions when you're getting adequate rest, only operates when you sleep long enough. It needs time. It needs hours. It needs sufficient opportunity to complete its work. When you sleep less than 6 hours, when you cut your sleep short, when you don't get enough deep sleep, the cleaning process doesn't complete, doesn't finish, doesn't have time to remove all the waste. The beta amyloid stays in your brain. ACC emulates further, builds up to higher and higher concentrations. Dr. Nedergaard's research showed in experiments that should alarm everyone that even one night, just one single night of sleep deprivation significantly reduces the brain's ability to clear beta amyloid, dramatically impairs the glymphatic system, leaves toxic waste in your brain. One night, and already your brain is drowning in its own waste products. Now, imagine what happens when you consistently sleep less than 6 hours. Night after night, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. The waste accumulates. The beta amyloid builds up. The toxic proteins reach higher and higher concentrations. The debris piles up. Your brain is literally drowning in its own toxic waste. And here's where it gets truly terrifying. Here's where the long-term consequences become clear. Here's where we see the real danger. A study from the National Institutes of Health, USIing PET scan imaging, which can actually visualize beta amyloid in living brains, showed something absolutely horrifying. Just one night of sleep deprivation caused a significant measurable increase in beta amyloid accumulation. throughout the brain, in multiple regions, in critical areas. One night, and already the Alzheimer's protein is building up. Now think about chronic sleep deprivation, years of inadequate sleep, decades of sleeping 6 hours or less, years of insufficient WAST clearance, years of accumulating toxic proteins, years of beta amyloid building up in your brain. This waste accumulation, this toxic protein buildup, is one of the major reasons, one of the primary mechanisms, why chronic sleep deprivation is now considered a major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. You're not just tired. You're not just foggy. You're not just having trouble concentrating. You're potentially setting yourself up, preparing the groundwork, laying the foundation for neurodegenerative disease decades down the line. The damage you're doing to your brain today, in your 30s or 40s or 50s, by not sleeping enough, may manifest as Alzheimer's disease, as dementia, as cognitive decline, in your 70s or 80s. By then, it will be too late. The damage will be done. The disease will be established. The brain will be irreversibly damaged. End of Part 1. 6,000 plus words. Part 2. The point of no return. 6,000 plus words. Part 2 intro. Midnight to 2 o'clock. Welcome back. In Part 1, we explored the nightmare unfolding inside your brain. The catastrophic damage accumulating night after night. When you consistently sleep less than 6 hours. We talked about the prefrontal cortex shutdown, turning you into an impulsive, emotionally unstable, cognitively impaired version of yourself. We discussed the memory formation collapse, the inability to learn, the destruction of your brain's filing system. We examined the amygdala hijack, the emotional dysregulation, the anxiety and mood problems that emerge from chronic sleep deprivation. We revealed the toxic waste accumulation, the beta amyloid buildup, the garbage piling up in your brain, setting the stage for Alzheimer's disease decades later. All of it happening silently, invisibly, insidiously, as you go about your day thinking everything is fine. But now, we need to confront an even more frightening question. A question that should concern everyone who has been chronically sleep deprived. Everyone who has spent years sleeping 6 hours or less. Can you fix it? If you've been sleeping 6 hours or less for months, years, maybe even decades, is the damage reversible? Can your brain heal itself? Can you recover? Can you undo the harm? Or have you already crossed a line, past a point of no return? Accumulated damage that can never be fully repaired? The answer will surprise you, will alarm you, will hopefully motivate you to make changes starting tonight. Because some of the news is hopeful. Some of the damage can be repaired, but some of what we're about to discuss, is permanent, irreversible, a price you'll pay for the rest of your life. Let's begin. Section 6. The structural brain damage. 2 o'clock. 12 o'clock. Let's start with something fundamental. Something that changes how we think about sleep. Deprivation. Something that moves this conversation from "I'm tired" to "I'm damaging my brain." The physical structure of your brain, the actual tissue, the neurons themselves, the gray matter, the white matter, the cells that make up the organ inside your skull, changes, shrinks, deteriorates when you don't sleep enough. This isn't just functional impairment. This isn't just your brain isn't working well. This is actual physical damage, actual structural changes, actual loss of brain tissue. Dr. Sigrid Vesey from the University of Pennsylvania conducted groundbreaking research that should terrify everyone. Research that revealed something most people don't know. Something most people can't imagine. She studied mice, laboratory animals, that were subjected to chronic sleep deprivation, restricted sleep over extended periods. And she looked at their brains, examined them at the cellular level, counted neurons, measured tissue, analyzed structure. What she found was absolutely shocking, absolutely definitive, absolutely horrifying. Chronic sleep deprivation caused actual death of neurons, permanent loss of brain cells, irreversible destruction of neural tissue, not dysfunction, not temporary impairment, not reduced activity, actual cell death, permanent loss, neurons that died and never came back. Specifically, she found that neurons in the locus coeruleus, a brain region absolutely critical for alertness, attention, cognition, cognitive function, were dying, were being destroyed, were disappearing. After just a few days of sleep restriction, these laboratory animals had lost 20-5% of these crucial neurons. 20-5%. 1/4. Gone forever. Now, you might be thinking, those were mice. That was extreme deprivation. That doesn't apply to humans. That doesn't apply to me. I wish that were true. I really do. But here's the devastating reality. Follow-up studies in humans, using advanced brain imaging techniques, high-resolution MRI scans, volumetric analysis, have shown remarkably similar patterns, disturbingly comparable results. A comprehensive study from Duke and U.S. Medical School in Singapore, one of Asia's premier research institutions, scanned the brains of thousands of individuals, measured brain volume, analyzed tissue density, tracked changes over time. They compared people who consistently slept 7 to 8 hours per night with people who chronically slept less than 7 hours, less than 6 hours, less than 5 hours. What they found should be front page news, should be taught in every school, should change how society thinks about sleep. Individuals who chronically slept less than 7 hours per night showed measurable shrinkage, actual or reduction in size, in multiple brain regions. The prefrontal cortex, that critical executive control center we discussed earlier, was smaller, had less volume, contained less tissue. The temporal lobe, critical for memory and language, was reduced in size, diminished in volume. The parietal cortex, essential for spatial reasoning and sensory processing, showed atrophy, showed shrinkage, showed loss of tissue, actual physical shrinkage, measurable loss of brain tissue, real structural damage. Dr. Michael Chi, who led the Singapore study, described the findings in stark terms. He said, and I quote, "The brains of people who don't sleep enough are aging faster than they should." Think about that statement. Really absorb what it means. Every night you sleep less than 7 hours. Every night you get by on 6 or 5 or 4 hours. You're not just tired the next day. You're not just a bit foggy. You're literally accelerating the aging of your brain. You're making your brain older than it should be. You're losing brain tissue that may never come back. You're giving yourself an older brain, a smaller brain, a more damaged brain than you need to have. But here's where it gets even more disturbing, even more concerning, even more personally relevant. The shrinkage isn't uniform, isn't equal across all brain regions, isn't randomly distributed. The regions that shrink most severely, that show the greatest loss, that deteriorate the fastest, are the same regions responsible for higher order thinking, complex cognition, uniquely human abilities, decision making, planning, impulse control, emotional regulation, abstract reasoning, moral judgment, personality expression, the very things that make you, that define your character, that determine your capabilities. Those are the regions dying, shrinking, deteriorating when you don't sleep enough. A longitudinal study from the University of Oslo, following participants over 7 years, scanning their brains at the beginning and again 7 years later, measuring changes, tracking deterioration, found that participants who consistently slept less than 6 hours per night showed significantly more brain atrophy, dramatically more shrinkage, substantially greater loss of tissue compared to those who slept 7 to 8 hours. And the amount of atrophy, the degree of shrinkage, was equivalent to adding several years of aging, to having a biologically older brain. 2. Being neurologically older than your chronological age. They were walking around with 70-year-old brains in 50-year-old bodies because of decades of insufficient sleep. Section 7. The WH matter catastrophe. 12 to 2200 hours. Now let's talk about something most people have never heard of. Something that's absolutely critical for brain function. Something that's devastatingly vulnerable to sleep deprivation. White matter. When most people think about the brain, they think about gray matter, the neurons, the cell bodies, the computational units, the processing power. That's important. Absolutely. But it's only half the story. White matter is equally critical, equally essential, equally important for cognitive function. White matter is the brain's wiring, the connections, the communication cables, the information highways that allow different brain regions to talk to each other, to coordinate, to work together. It's made up of axons, long fibers extending from neurons, wrapped in a fatty substance called myelin, which acts like insulation on electrical wires, making signals travel faster, more efficiently, more reliably. When white matter is healthy, when these connections are strong, when the wiring is intact, your brain operates smoothly. Thoughts flow quickly. Information transfers seamlessly. Different regions coordinate effortlessly. Everything works together beautifully. But when white matter is damaged, when the connections degrade, when the wiring deteriorates, everything slows down, becomes inefficient, becomes disorganized, becomes dysfunctional. It's like having a fast computer with a slow internet connection. The processing power is there, but the communication bottleneck ruins everything. And here's the devastating problem. Here's what goes terribly wrong with chronic sleep deprivation. White matter is extremely vulnerable to insufficient sleep, remarkably sensitive to sleep restriction, dramatically impaired by chronic deprivation. Dr. Paul Thompson from UCLA, one of the world's leading experts in brain imaging, used a sophisticated technique called diffusion tensor imaging, DTI, which can visualize white matter, can assess its integrity, can measure its health. He studied the white matter of people with different sleep patterns, compared good sleepers with poor sleepers, analyzed the connections, measured the integrity. What he found was deeply alarming, profoundly disturbing, absolutely clear in its implications. People who chronically slept less than 6 hours per night showed significant deterioration in white matter integrity, measurable degradation, real damage to the brain's wiring, the myelin sheaths, that critical insulation, were breaking down, degrading, falling apart. The axons themselves, the actual fibers, were degenerating, deteriorating, dying. The brain's communication network, its information superhighway, was literally falling apart. Connection by connection, fiber by fiber. But here's what makes this particularly devastating. What makes this especially concerning for long-term brain health? White matter doesn't regenerate easily, doesn't repair quickly, doesn't bounce back the way some other brain structures do. Unlike some aspects of the brain, which have remarkable plasticity, which can form new connections, which can adapt and compensate. Once white matter is damaged, it often stays damaged. The connections remain broken. The wiring remains faulty. A long-term study from the University of California, San Francisco, following older adults for several years, tracking their sleep patterns and their brain structure, found progressive white matter deterioration over time in those with chronic sleep problems, worsening connections, increasing damage, accelerating degradation. And here's the truly alarming finding. One that should concern everyone who has spent years sleeping poorly. Even when sleep improved, even when participants later started sleeping better, even when they corrected their sleep habits, the white matter damage remained. The connection stayed broken. The deterioration persisted. The wiring, once damaged, stayed damaged. This has profound implications, devastating consequences for cognitive aging and brain health. White matter deterioration is one of the primary hallmarks of cognitive decline, one of the key features of dementia, one of the main predictors of Alzheimer's disease. By chronically sleep depriving yourself, by spending years sleeping less than 6 hours, you're accelerating this deterioration. You are speeding up this damage. You're giving yourself a head start on cognitive decline. You're choosing, whether you realize it or not, to have an older brain than you should, to have worse connections than you need, to have a more damaged neural network than necessary. Dr. Christine Yaff from UCSF, one of the world's foremost experts on cognitive aging, put it bluntly in her published research. She said, "Chronic sleep deprivation is one of the most potent accelerators of brain aging that we know of. More potent than many diseases. More damaging than many toxic exposures. More aging than most lifestyle factors. Just not sleeping enough consistently over years is one of the worst things you can do to your brain." Thionate, the blood-brain barrier breakdown, 2200 hours, 32:00. Now we need to discuss your brain's security system, its protective fortress, its defensive barrier against threats. The blood-brain barrier. This is one of the most important protective mechanisms in your entire body. One of the most sophisticated defensive systems evolution has created. One of the most critical structures for maintaining brain health. Your brain is delicate, vulnerable, precious, extraordinarily sensitive to toxic substances, to pathogens, to inflammatory molecules, to anything harmful circulating in your bloodstream. It cannot afford to be exposed to everything flowing through your blood, every toxin you encounter, every inflammatory chemical your body produces, every pathogen that enters your system. If all of that reached your brain, could access your neural tissue, could interact with your neurons, the consequences would be catastrophic, devastating, fatal. So, your body has evolved a remarkable defense, an extraordinary protective system. The blood-brain barrier is like a selective fortress, a highly sophisticated filter, a discriminating checkpoint that surrounds your entire brain, protecting it from threats. It's made up of tightly joined endothelial cells, specialized support cells called astrocytes, parasites that regulate flow, and a complex matrix of proteins, all working together. When it's functioning properly, when it's healthy and intact, when it's doing its job, it lets in what your brain needs: oxygen, glucose, nutrients, essential molecules, but keeps out potential threats, toxins, pathogens, inflammatory molecules, anything that could harm neural tissue. Your brain is protected, secure, safe, able to function without being constantly assaulted by threats. But when the blood-brain barrier breaks down, when it becomes leaky, when it loses its integrity, all hell breaks loose. Protection fails. The fortress walls crumble. Your brain becomes vulnerable. And here's the terrifying truth that most people don't know. That changes everything about how we should think about sleep. Chronic sleep deprivation breaks down the blood-brain barrier, compromises its integrity, makes it leaky, destroys its protective function. Dr. Mark Zielinski from Boston University conducted experiments that revealed this horrifying reality. He studied animals, subjected them to sleep deprivation, and then examined their blood-brain barriers at the cellular level. What he found was absolutely clear, absolutely disturbing, absolutely definitive. Sleep-deprived animals showed significantly increased permeability in their blood-brain barriers, measurably more leakage, substantially compromised protection. Things that should stay out of the brain were getting in, crossing the barrier, accessing neural tissue, causing damage. But it gets worse, much worse. A study from Uppsala University in Sweden looked at humans, real people, after just one night of total sleep deprivation. They measured levels of specific proteins in the blood. Proteins called S100B and NSE, which are biomarkers, indicators, specific signals of blood-brain barrier breakdown. These proteins are normally kept inside the brain, trapped behind the blood-brain barrier, unable to escape into the bloodstream. When they show up in blood tests, it means the barrier has been breached, has become leaky, has lost its integrity. After just one night without sleep, just 20-4 hours of being awake, levels of these proteins increased significantly, measurably, dramatically, indicating that the blood-brain barrier had become compromised. One night, and already your brain's protective fortress is failing. Now imagine years, decades of chronic sleep restriction, of consistently sleeping less than 6 hours, of never giving your brain adequate rest. Years of your blood-brain barrier becoming increasingly leaky, increasingly permeable, increasingly compromised. What happens when the fortress walls crumble? When the protection fails? When the barrier breaks down? Inflammatory molecules from your bloodstream, cytokines, chemokines, immune signals that should stay in the body, flood into your brain, cross the weakened barrier, access neural tissue, trigger massive neuroinflammation. Immune cells that shouldn't be in your brain, white blood cells, inflammatory cells, cross the compromised barrier, invade neural tissue, attack brain cells, cause widespread damage. Toxins that should be filtered out, environmental toxins, metabolic waste, harmful substances accumulate in your brain, reach neurons, cause cellular stress, trigger degeneration. Your brain loses its protection, becomes exposed, becomes vulnerable to every threat, every toxin, every inflammatory signal. And here's the truly frightening part. The aspect that makes his continue 11:14 p.m. orchestrated expansion of lengthy narrative script. The user wants me to continue and finish the complete script to reach approximately 11,000, 12,000 words total. I need to continue part 2 and add more sections with extensive detail, using lots of commas, ellipses, and other punctuation to slow down narration. Let me continue from where I left off and add several more comprehensive sections. So devastating. Once the blood-brain barrier is compromised, once it becomes leaky, once its integrity is lost, it creates a vicious cycle, a downward spiral, a self-perpetuating problem. The inflammation caused by the leaky barrier damages the barrier further, makes it even more permeable, weakens it even more, which allows or inflammatory molecules to enter, which causes more inflammation, which damages the barrier more, round and round and round. each cycle making the problem worse, each rotation causing more damage, each iteration bringing you closer to neurological catastrophe. This process, this blood-brain barrier breakdown, this loss of protection, has been implicated in virtually every neurodegenerative disease, every form of dementia, every type of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS, vascular dementia. All of them involve blood-brain barrier dysfunction. And you, by chronically not sleeping enough, by consistently restricting your sleep to 6 hours or less, are actively contributing to that breakdown, are accelerating that deterioration, are destroying your brain's protective fortress. Night after night, week after week, year after year. Section 9. The dopamine system collapse. 32:00-42:00. Now let's talk about motivation, about drive, about your ability to feel pleasure, about what makes life worth living. The dopamine system. Dopamine is often called the pleasure chemical, the reward neurotransmitter, the motivation molecule. But those labels are oversimplified, incomplete, missing the full picture. Dopamine is really about motivation, reward prediction, drive, anticipation, the feeling that something is worthwhile pursuing, the sense that effort will lead to satisfaction. Your brain's dopamine system motivates you to pursue goals, to seek rewards, to engage with life, to find meaning in activities, to feel pleasure from accomplishments, to want things, to care about things, to be excited about things. Without adequate dopamine function, without a healthy dopamine system, without proper dopaminergic signaling, everything feels flat, unrewarding, pointless, meaningless, like nothing matters, like nothing is worth the effort. This state is cal-led anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, the loss of motivation, the death of drive. And here's the problem. Here's what goes catastrophically wrong with chronic sleep deprivation. The dopamine system systematically dismantles. Progress evenly deteriorates, gradually collapses. When you don't sleep enough. Let me explain the neuroscience, the mechanism, the process by which this happens. Dopamine is produced primarily in two brain regions: the substantia nigra deep in the midbrain, and the ventral tegmental area nearby. From these production centers, dopaminergic neurons project to other regions, sending connections throughout the brain, particularly to the striatum, the nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal cortex. These dopamine pathways are responsible for motivation, reward processing, decision-making, goal-directed behavior, pleasure experience, drive, and ambition. Now, research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, one of the world's premier neuroscience research centers, showed something deeply disturbing about what happens after even brief sleep deprivation. After just one night of sleep deprivation, just 20-4 hours without sleep, dopamine receptor availability in the brain, the number of receptors ready to receive dopamine signals, significantly decreased, measurably declined, substantially reduced. Meaning, even though dopamine was still being released, even though the signal was being sent, there were fewer receptors to receive the message, fewer ways for the signal to be heard, fewer opportunities for the system to function. It's like your brain's dopamine phones are ringing, but nobody's answering. The calls are going to voicemail. The messages aren't being received. The system is trying to work, but it can't function properly, can't complete its job, can't do what it's supposed to do. But chronic sleep deprivation, years of sleeping less than 6 hours, causes even more profound hangs, even more devastating damage. A comprehensive study from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, using PET scan imaging technology that can visualize dopamine systems in living brains, studied the dopamine systems of people with chronic sleep deprivation, compared them to healthy sleepers, measured receptor density, assessed dopamine release, analyzed system function. They found reduced dopamine release, fewer dopamine receptors, decreased dopamine signaling throughout the entire reward system in multiple critical regions. The participants' brains, their dopamine systems, looked remarkably similar to, were nearly indistinguishable from, the brains of people with clinical depression or people with substance addiction. The same neurological profile, the same system dysfunction, the same reward circuit problems, and subjectively, experientially, in terms of how they felt day to day, these chronically sleep-deprived individuals reported lack of motivation for previously enjoyable activities, decreased pleasure in hobbies they used to love, difficulty focusing on long-term goals, inability to feel excited about achievements, a general sense of meh about life, emotional flatness, lack of drive. This is anhedonia, the clinical term for inability to feel pleasure, the medical diagnosis for loss of motivation, the formal name for what chronic sleep deprivation does to your reward system. But here's what makes this truly alarming. What makes this especially concerning for anyone who has spent years sleeping poorly. The dopamine system takes a very long time to recover, doesn't bounce back quickly, doesn't restore itself easily. Dr. Nora Fokow, the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, one of the world's foremost experts on dopamine and reward systems, has shown in her extensive research that even after extended periods of adequate sleep, even after months of sleeping properly, even after correct sleep habits, dopamine receptor levels can remain suppressed, can stay reduced, can continue showing deficits. The system doesn't just snap back to normal, doesn't immediately restore itself, doesn't quickly recover. Recovery is slow, gradual, incomplete, and may never reach original baseline levels, may never fully restore, may leave permanent deficits. Think about what this means for your life, for your daily experience, for your sense of meaning and purpose, your career goals, your hobbies and interests, your relationships and social connections, your passions and dreams, your creative pursuits, your personal growth. All of them require motivation, drive, the feeling that they're worthwhile, the sense that effort leads to reward, the ability to feel pleasure from achievement. When your dopamine system is compromised, when your reward circuits are damaged, when your motivation neurotransmitters aren't functioning properly, everything feels hard, less rewarding, less meaningful, less worth the effort. You're not lazy. You're not unmotivated by choice. You're not lacking willpower or discipline. Your brain's reward system has been damaged, compromised, potentially permanently altered by years of insufficient sleep. The very neurochemistry that makes you want things, care about things, feel excited about things, feel pleasure from accomplishments, has been systematically destroyed by not sleeping enough, night after night, year after year. Section 10. Can you reverse the damage? 42:00-52:00. So now we arrive at the question. The crucial question. The question that's probably been burning in your mind throughout this entire presentation. Can you fix his? Can you reverse the damage? Can you undo years or decades of sleep deprivation? If you've been sleeping 6 hours or less for years, maybe decades, maybe your entire adult life, is the damage reversible? Can your brain heal? Can you recover? Or have you already crossed a point of no return? The answer is complicated, nuanced, neither completely hopeful nor entirely devastating. Somewhere in between. Let's start with the good news. The hopeful information. The positive side of this equation. Some aspects of sleep deprivation damage are definitely reversible, can be repaired, can be healed. Dr. Matthew Walker's research has shown, demonstrated clearly, proven definitively, that after catching up on sleep for several consecutive nights, many cognitive functions begin to recover. Attention improves. Reaction times normalize. Decision-making gets better. Working memory capacity increases. Focus returns. The hippocampus, starts forming memories properly again. The prefrontal cortex regains some executive function. Cognitive testing scores improve. The amygdala calms down, becomes less reactive, shows more normal activation patterns, allows better emotional regulation. Even some aspects of the inflammatory response can be reduced, can be calmed, can be brought back toward normal levels. A study from the University of Chicago showed that participants who increased their sleep from 6 hours to 8 hours per night over a 2-week period showed significant improvements in cognitive testing, better scores across multiple domains, enhanced performance on attention tasks, improved memory formation, better decision-making. Their mood improved, anxiety decreased, emotional stability increased, stress responses normalized, inflammatory markers in their blood decreased, showed less systemic inflammation, demonstrated reduced immune activation. So yes, some recovery is absolutely possible, definitely achievable, within reach for most people. If you start sleeping properly tonight, if you commit to 7 to 8 hours consistently, if you make sleep a genuine priority, your brain will begin healing, will start recovering, will show measurable improvements within days to weeks. But, and this is absolutely crucial, this is the hard truth that everyone needs to understand. Not all damage is reversible. Not all harm can be undone. Not all consequences can be escaped. The neuronal cell death that Dr. V.A.C. documented in her research, those lost neurons, those dead brain cells, don't come back, don't regenerate, don't get replaced. They're gone forever, permanently lost. The white matter deterioration we discussed, those damaged axons, those broken connections, those degraded communication pathways, often remain damaged, stay broken, continue showing deficits even after sleep improves, may never fully restore. The synaptic pruning errors, those inappropriately eliminated connections, those wrongly maintained pathways, may never be completely reestablished, may leave permanent organizational problems, may result in lasting network dysfunction. The structural brain shrinkage, that actual loss of brain volume, T-hat measurable reduction in tissue, is often permanent, is frequently irreversible, typically doesn't fully restore even with years of adequate sleep. Think of it this way, and this analogy is important for understanding what can and can't be fixed. If you scratch a piece of wood deeply, gouge it, damage the structure, the scratch is permanent. It's there forever. You can't undo it. But if you just put a layer of dust on the wood, if you merely make the surface dirty, you can whippy it off, clean it away, restore it to pristine condition. Some effects of sleep deprivation are like scratches, permanent structural damage, irreversible harm, lasting consequences. Others are like dust, functional impairments that can be cleaned away, reversible problems, correctable issues. The question for anyone who has spent years sleeping poorly is, how much of your brain damage is scratches, and how much is dust? The honest answer from current research, the truth based on available evidence, is that we don't fully know. We can't precisely predict. We can't definitively say for each individual. But we do know this, and this knowledge should motivate immediate change. The longer you've been sleep deprived, the more years you've spent sleeping less than 6 hours, the more likely you have accumulated irreversible damage, permanent structural changes, lasting consequences. A comprehensive study from the University of Sydney looked at long-term sleep patterns over decades, followed people for 30 years, tracked their sleep habits and their brain health. They found that people who had decades of poor sleep, even when they later improved their sleep habits, even when they spent years sleeping early in their later life, still showed more cognitive decline than those who had consistently slept well throughout their lives, still had worse memory, still had poorer executive function, still showed more brain atrophy. The damage had accumulated, had become at least partially permanent, couldn't be fully undone. And here's perhaps the most sobering finding from this research, the most concerning implication. Some of the damage appeared to be permanent even in people who corrected the IR sleep in midlife, even in people who spent their last 20 or 30 years sleeping well. The harm done in their 20s, 30s, and 40s continued affecting them in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. The brain remembered the deprivation, carried the scars, showed lasting consequences. Decades later. Section 11. The window of opportunity. 52:00-60:00. But here's something critically important. Something that provides hope. Something that should motivate immediate action. Your brain has remarkable plasticity, extraordinary adaptive capacity, incredible healing potential. If you catch the problem early enough, if you make changes before too much permanent damage accumulates, if you start prioritizing sleep rather than later, your brain can recover substantially, can heal significantly, can restore much of its original function. Dr. Alan Rechtschaffen, one of the pioneers of modern sleep research, who has spent over 50 years studying sleep, describes this beautifully and accurately. He says, "The brain is remarkably forgiving in the short term, but ruthlessly unforgiving in the long term." What does this mean exactly? Let me break it down clearly. It means there's a window of opportunity, a period of time a critical phase during which damage can still be reversed. Harm can still be undone. Consequences can still be avoided. If you've been sleeping poorly for a few months, even a year or two, even up to perhaps 5 years, most of the damage is probably reversible. Most of the harm can likely be undone. Most of the consequences can potentially be avoided. Commit to better sleep starting tonight. Prioritize 7 to 8 hours consistently. Make sleep non-negotiable in your life. And within weeks to months, your brain will substantially recover, will show remarkable improvement, will restore much of its original function. Your prefrontal cortex will regain executive control. Your hippocampus will start forming memories properly again. Your amygdala will calm down. Your dopamine system will begin healing. Your lymphatic system will clear accumulated waste. Your blood-brain barrier will restore integrity. Much of the functional impairment, much of the cognitive deficit, much of the emotional dysregulation will improve dramatically. But if you've been sleeping 6 hours or less for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, your entire adult life, some of that damage is likely permanent. Some of that harm cannot be fully undone. Some of those consequences will follow you for life. You can still improve. You absolutely should still make changes. You can definitely prevent further deterioration. But you may never get back to where you would have been. You may never fully restore what was lost. You may never completely undo the accumulated damage. Had you slept properly all along? Had you prioritized sleep from the beginning? Had you one day restored these consequences earlier? This is why this conversation is so urgent, so critical, so time-sensitive. Every day you continue with insufficient sleep. Every night you choose to stay up late. Every week you prioritize everything except or rest. Is another day of potentially irreversible damage. Another night of permanent consequences. Another week of accumulating harm. Every day, every week, every month, every year. The window is closing. The opportunity is shrinking. The chance for full recovery is diminishing. Dr. Charles Cheesler from Harvard Medical School, who has spent his entire career studying sleep and circadian rhythms, who advises Fortune 500 companies and government agencies, puts it more bluntly. He says, sleep deprivation is a slow-motion catastrophe. You don't see it happening in real time. You don't feel it, destroying you day by day, until suddenly it's too late to fully reverse. Think about that metaphor. A slow-motion catastrophe. It's not like a car accident. Sudden, obvious, immediately devastating. It's like rust slowly destroying a bridge. Like termites quietly eating away at a house's foundation. Like plaque gradually building up in arteries. You don't notice it day to day. You don't see the incremental damage. You don't feel each small step of deterioration. But year after year, decade after decade, the damage accumulates. The structure weakens, until one day it's too late. The bridge collapses. The house falls. The heart attack happens. The dementia begins. And by then, the damage is done. The consequences are irreversible. The opportunity for prevention has passed. Final section, the choice you must make tonight. 60:00-68:00. So let us wrap this up. Let's bring this all together. Let's talk about what you should do with this information. What choices you face. What decisions you need to make. Tonight. Right now. In this moment. You stand at a crossroads. One path leads to continued sleep deprivation, continued brain damage, continued accumulation of potentially irreversible harm. The other path leads to recovery, to healing, to protecting what remains, to preventing further catastrophe. The choice should be obvious. But most people won't make it. Most people won't change. Most people will hear all this information, feel concerned for a moment, and then do exactly what they've always done. Don't be most people. First, and this is absolutely critical, get tested, get assessed, establish a baseline. If you've been chronically sleeping less than 6 hours for years, if you've spent a decade or more sleep deprived, consider getting a comprehensive cognitive assessment. Talk to your doctor about brain health screening. Maybe get an MRI to assess brain volume. Check inflammatory markers in your blood. Measure your cognitive function objectively. Establish a baseline so you know where you stand. So you can track improvement. So you can see if intervention is working. Second, prioritize sleep as a non-negotiable biological necessity, not as a luxury, not as something you'll get to when you have time, not as optional. 7 to 8 hours every single night, not just on weekends, not just when you're not busy, every night. Period. End of discussion. No more "I'll sleep when I'm dead." Because that mindset is precisely what's killing your brain cell by cell. Day by day, night by night. No more sleep is for the weak. Because the truly weak thing, the genuinely pathetic thing, is destroying your own brain through ignorance and poor choices. No more "I'll catch up on the weekend." Because sleep, that doesn't work that way. Accumulated damage doesn't magically disappear with 2 nights of longer sleep. Every single night. 7 to 8 hours. Minimum. Non-negotiable. Absolute. Requirement. Third, create an environment that's genuinely conducive to sleep, that supports rest, That facilitates recovery. Dark room. Completely dark. No light pollution. Blackout curtains if necessary. Eye mask if needed. Cool temperature. Between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe even cooler. Your body needs to cool down to sleep deeply. Comfortable bed. Proper mattress. Supportive pillow. Clean sheets. Physical comfort matters. No screens before bed. No phones. No tablets. No televisions. No blue light. For at least 1 hour before sleep. Preferably 2 hours. Consistent schedule. Same bedtime every night. Same wake time every morning. Even on weekends. Your brain needs regularity. Your circadian rhythm needs consistency. Fourth, if you have sleep disorders, if you suffer from sleep apnea, insomnia, restless leg syndrome, periodic limb movement disorder, any condition that impairs sleep quality, get them treated immediately. Not next month. Not when you have time. Not when it becomes convenient. Immediately. These condominium emissions are actively damaging your brain every single night, destroying neurons while you're unconscious, accumulating harm while you think you're resting. Sleep apnea in particular is devastating. It's like repeatedly suffocating your brain, depriving it of oxygen, causing massive stress and damage, night after night after night. If you snore loudly, if you wake up gasping, if your partner says you stop breathing, get tested for sleep apnea. Get treated. Use a CPAP machine if prescribed. Protect your brain. Fifth, understand that recovery takes time. Healing isn't instantaneous. Reversal isn't immediate. If you've been sleep deprived for years or decades, you won't feel fully recovered in a week. Won't see complete or restoration in a month. It may take months of consistent adequate sleep to see substantial improvement, to feel significantly better, to restore meaningful function. Be patient, but be consistent. Keep sleeping properly night after night. Trust the process. Give your brain time to heal. And finally, the most important thing, the decision that matters more than anything else. Start tonight. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not after this project is finished. Not after the holidays. Not after things calm down at work. Tonight. Right now. As soon as this video ends. Because every single night that you sleep less than 7 hours, every single night that you deprive your brain of adequate rest, is another night of accumulating damage. Another night of neurons dying. Another night of synapses being inappropriately pruned. Another night of toxic waste building up. Another night of beta amyloid accumulating. Another night of inflammation, damaging tissue. Another night of blood-brain barrier breakdown. Another night of white matter deterioration. Another night of structural shrinkage. Another night of dopamine system dysfunction. Another night closer to irreversible catastrophe. Another night closer to permanent damage. Another night closer to consequences you cannot undo. Your brain, that remarkable 3-pound universe inside your skull, that contains every memory you've ever made, every skill you've ever learned, every emotion you've ever felt, every relationship you've ever built, every thought you've ever had, every dream you've ever dreamed, every plan you've ever made, every hope you've ever held, everything that makes you, you, your personality, your character, your abilities, your potential, your future, your very identity is literally falling apart. Cell by cell, connection by connection, function by function, when you don't sleep enough. And here's the thing that should terrify you. That should motivate immediate change. That should fundamentally alter your priorities starting right now. You only get one brain, one lifetime, one chance. You can't replace it when it breaks. You can't upgrade it when it fails. You can't trade it in for a new model when it wears out. The brain you have, right now in this moment, is the only brain you will ever have. For your entire life. Until the day you die. And how you treat it over the next days, weeks, months, years, and decades will determine whether you spend your later years sharp, engaged, cognitively intact, mentally healthy, able to recognize your loved ones, able to remember your life, able to function independently, or whether you spend those years struggling with memory problems, cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, unable to care for yourself, unable to recognize family, unable to remember your own history, slowly losing everything that makes you human. The choice is yours, but the window is closing. Every night, every week, every year of insufficient sleep is making that window smaller, narrower, harder to climb through. So what will you choose? Will you prioritize sleep? Will you give your brain the restoration it needs? Will you protect the very essence of who you are? Or will you continue down the path of slow motion neurological catastrophe, of gradual brain destruction, of accumulating irreversible damage? The answer should be obvious. The choice should be clear. The decision should be immediate. Sleep isn't just about feeling rested tomorrow. It's not just about having energy. It's not just about mood or productivity. It's about protecting the very essence of who you are, preserving your memories, maintaining your cognition, safeguarding your personality, protecting your future, saving your brain, saving yourself. Don't take that lightly. Don't postpone that decision. Don't wait another day, another week, another month, another year. to make the change that could save your brain, that could preserve your mind, that could protect your future self, that could mean the difference between a healthy old age and a devastating decline. Make the choice tonight. Commit to change right now. Prioritize sleep SDRTing immediately. Your future self, the person you'll be in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40 years, is depending on the choice you make tonight. Don't let them down. Don't condemn them to cognitive decline. Don't sentence them to neurodegeneration. Sleep properly, adequately, consistently. Starting tonight, your brain, your mind, your future, your very identity depends on it. Thank you for watching. Now go to bed.